Okay, hello everybody. It is 5 p.m. in the Global South. We're based here in Melbourne. I'd like to acknowledge that the lands that we meet here on today are the traditional lands of the Aboriginal people. I meet you here in the lands of the Wurundjeri Willen people, the traditional owners of the land in the northeast of Melbourne in Victoria. We're meeting today from multiple spaces and lands and countries across Australia. And I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and the communities that are strong holders of traditional knowledge in the lands that we meet, and particularly as we discuss what open recognition and knowledge systems are today. It's important that we recognise the First Peoples of our countries that we meet on. So it's an important session this afternoon, the third of our sessions from Australia. And I'm going to hand over to Peter to introduce his team. I'm going to hang on to the end, hopefully with some wonderful questions to pose this partnership and their thinking about what open recognition and open learning and open education looks like. So thanks for joining us.
Great. Thank you, Catherine. Hello from Melbourne, where it's the end of the afternoon. And we know that whatever time zone you're in, you've chosen to spend some time with us as part of the ePIC event to talk about recognition. And in our case, not only the context of open badges, but more broadly. We'd like to thank you for your attention, and thank you to Serge and Don and his colleagues at the Open Recognition Alliance for the opportunity to contribute. So I and my colleagues, who I'll introduce in a moment, know just how hard it is to bring big groups of people together in one place, never mind internationally and online. So thank you for your hard work. And I'm joined by three guests to talk about what we have grandly titled Education, Work and the Economies of Recognition in Contemporary Australia. Now, I'll talk about why that focus in a moment, but for now, please let me introduce firstly Derek Scott, who's CEO and principal of Haileybury, which is one of the leading independent schools in the Asia Pacific region, with campuses in Melbourne, Darwin and Beijing, and relationships throughout the region. Derek's been principal of Haileybury since 2007, and is also chairman of Haileybury International School in China. Derek's worked extensively on curriculum development and is on the federal government's Ministerial Council for International Education. Hello, Derek.
Hello, Peter. Thank you.
And secondly, Martine Letts. Martine's CEO of the Committee for Melbourne, which is an apolitical, not-for-profit organisation that brings together over 150 organisations from Greater Melbourne's business, academic and community sectors. And those people have a passion for shaping Melbourne as a leading global city. Martine was previously Chief Executive Officer of the China Business Council, was Secretary General of the Australian Red Cross, and was formerly a senior Australian diplomat. Hello, Martine.
Hi, Peter. Good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you. And finally, Colette Rogers, who's a partner at Deloitte and leads Deloitte's national education practice. Colette's worked on a range of complex programs and initiatives in response to strategic change and policy reform in education. Hello, Colette.
Hi, Peter. Thanks. Good to be here.
Thank you. So my name is Peter Thomas, and I'm director of the EdTech Haileybury X on behalf of Haileybury, which includes projects on the future of micro-credentialing. So what are we here to talk about? Now, we know that for Australian government education industry, micro-credentials and digital badges are a new, growing and visible phenomenon. They're seen as a way of addressing skills gaps for workers at a lower cost and more quickly than traditional training. And the badges that represent that learning can complement the kind of terminal credentials that learners receive on leaving school, called the ATAR in Australia, or even degree awards from universities. Now, as shown by the work of the Open Recognition Alliance, there's an incredible amount of innovation going on in this area right now. I guess you've been hearing about some of that work internationally today during the event. Now, we could have talked about micro-credentials and open badges and about the work we're doing, but I guess I thought that as we're fortunate enough to have leaders from Australian business, education and the civic and economic communities, we should look more broadly at the concept of recognition. And so based on some of the ideas that flow from Serge's work, we're going to explore in a variety of ways recognition and what might be called the recognition economy, which I think we're defining as the relationships between individuals, businesses, education and government, and the creation of forms of social capital that drive new economic, social and cultural value. As I said, a big grand claim, but we'll see how this works out in a moment. And so while that involves digital badges, open badges and micro-credentials, there are some really interesting ideas that can emerge if you look at the idea of recognizing things that people do, education, work and civic participation, and what recognizing those things means. So there might be badges and credentials of all kinds, but essentially it's about creating value for people, institutions and society. So all three speakers will approach this idea in a variety of ways, and we'll do it, I hope, in terms of on the ground things that are happening in their contexts. But I should say we're not theorizing and we're not presenting finished ideas either. Our aim is to give you some insight into how our three speakers are thinking about the issues that in some way relate to recognition. So what I'm going to do, I'll ask each speaker to talk to us. We'll have a brief discussion about what they've said before moving on. And if time permits, we'll close with some questions. So to get us started, please welcome Colette Rogers, who's partner at Deloitte, to talk to us. Colette.
Thanks very much, Peter, for the great introduction. So I just want to start this conversation from the perspective of what businesses are looking for in terms of skills, and then how that translates into different models of recognition. So I think, you know, and I think this is now becoming widely accepted, this soft skills and personal attributes are just as important to success as technical skills. And it's pretty intuitive to say that businesses with more skilled staff have higher rates of innovation and productivity, and there's a really clear relationship between human capital and economic growth. And so then, you know, historically, formal qualifications and technical skills are critically important, but increasingly they're only part of the ask. And I think this is becoming quite well accepted now, that soft skills and personal attributes are just as important to success, and this is increasingly going to be the case. So more and more as job profiles change. But interestingly, despite the value that businesses place on soft skills, when you look at data from LinkedIn profiles, you can see, so in the Australian context, less than 1% of Australians report having any soft skills on their LinkedIn profiles. And that level of underreporting is consistent globally. So I guess the question is why? It could be that we're uncomfortable with claiming skills where we don't have formal credentials, where most of us don't for soft skills, or it could be just that we underestimate the relative importance of soft skills. But that's where the skill development needs are, technical and soft skills in combination. And then I think, you know, the second thing to think of as part of this is the way in which we're developing or acquiring skills is changing. And the big themes there are, again, they're familiar themes around, you know, certainly for people in the workforce, shorter bites of learning, learning that's more integrated with work. So it's at work, it's with work, and it's through work. But I also think there's an important role for education providers. And so some research that we've done in an Australian context shows that Australian workers who are interested in engaging in formal learning, they do see the value of having a formal certification or you know, a testament that recognises their skills. So in some work that we did recently, we found that 6 out of 10 workers believe that the formal certification of knowledge and skills has value, like it's a signal, it's an indicator to employers of your capabilities, and people do believe that it's an important part of both hiring and promotion decisions. And it might be recognition received at the completion of a course or a training program, or it might be the recognition of skills or knowledge that have been acquired at some point during your life. I think, and so then almost in response to that, because it's like, what problem are we trying to solve for? In response to that, new models for assessing and recognising skills are emerging. You know, there's early models emerging for assessing and certifying competency acquired through on-the-job experiences. I think these, you know, there are some good models, but they're reasonably nascent, and they'll require more development and testing, which, you know, in my view, can only really effectively be achieved in collaboration with employers. And then also, like, education providers have made progress in skill-based, relatively small and bite-sized learning, and some are experimenting going through to skill credentialing. So I think that's, it's the emergence of these new needs around recognition of skills, and then the models are responding to that. I think, then I think just onto the topic and the point that you raised, Peter, around civic participation, I think expectations are also on the rise for more effective ways of recognising the broader contributions that employees or staff make to their communities and society. And I think that's a broad sentiment, but I think it's particularly the case for younger generations. And just to sort of try and put a bit of proof point around that, Deloitte recently, in fact earlier this year, so during the pandemic, ran a global survey of millennials and Generation Z, so what I would call younger generations, earlier this year, and found that the pandemic has actually engendered an even stronger sense of individual responsibility among those in those age groups. So nearly 75% said the pandemic has made them more sympathetic towards others' needs, and that they will take actions to have a positive impact on their communities in the future. And a similar number, and let's not forget this particular cohort, if you like, has been for the most part quite significantly impacted in terms of employment, workforce participation by the pandemic, but a similar number said that they had already taken immediate actions to have a positive impact on society. And so I think there's a really important link there about, we need to think about how new models of recognition also will support individuals and communities in capturing a much broader range of contributions, so technical, soft or transferable skills, but also the broader contributions that people make.
Great, thank you, Colette. So we should have a chat about that. I guess one of the, one of the things that came across when we were chatting was this notion of responsibility, and how do you recognize a sense of responsibility, in the broad sweep of things that, are harder to recognize and warrant than others. I was kind of pondering about the idea of, what would a marker of civic responsibility look like? And who would do that is a pretty interesting question. I mean, do you have any thoughts about that? How do you
yeah, I mean,
sense of responsibility?
I think it, if you look back in time, there's actually many different, models, certificates and awards for actually recognising civic contributions. So it's like, the certificate for completion for a training course. We've always got them. We've always done short courses. We've always completed them. So I think, there are many models there in terms of people undertaking civic activities, particularly in, for example, youth in school and extracurricular activities that they undertake, and how they are recognised. I guess there's, while there might be a proliferation of activity, there's no particular scaffolding around that. But I think there's also a question about how much do you actually sort of try and design these things from a top-down sort of system point of view, and how much do you actually let them, organically build, if you like. And if you think about, the Australian Qualifications Framework, which is the very clear articulation of Australian qualifications, that actually, was sort of, put into place, if you like, after our qualifications had already established themselves. So I think there's sort of, these things are sort of useful, particularly for providing clarity and making sense of what's in place. I don't know how much you sort of want to, kind of stifle innovation, if you like, by trying to kind of hard code a lot of these things.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I guess 2 or 3 issues.
Could I ask you?
Sorry, Derek, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just wondering if I could ask a question around language, because I'm really intrigued by the set of skills that you're describing, and obviously I think it's people skills, collaboration, teamwork, all of that extraordinary nuanced relationship work that we want people to have. But I've kind of pushed back a bit against the notion of calling it soft skills, because I feel like somehow that devalues it. And obviously you would have done some thinking on this. I'm interested in your views on it, because I haven't yet necessarily found another language to put around it.
Yeah. Yeah, look, I agree with you. I think I'm not fond of the term. I haven't found, soft skills, I think transferable skills is better, because they're the skills that you can take with you into different technical domains. And yes, I am talking about, enterprise skills, employability skills, things that are transferable, and including things like communication, teamwork, problem solving, as well as like emotional judgment, but also like professional ethics, global citizenship. So I think transferable skills is as good as I've got. And I know, I do know the soft skills is a little bit jarring because it's suggesting for some reason that it's not as important as technical skills, which therefore must be hard.
Yeah, and the flow on from that is it's probably easier for us to teach someone the technical skills of accounting, but much harder to teach them or to learn over time all the subtlety of human relationships, isn't it?
Yeah, agree.
And indeed, and what would be the thing that how would you display that is kind of one of the issues, isn't it? It's hard enough for the supposed soft skills, whichever language you use. How do you display those so that, part of the whole discussion here is about, is this an economy and how does it function and what's its value and how does it add value? And so it's really hard when you have difficult things to describe to try and figure out how you evidence them and then how they therefore gain value. Martine, do you have any thoughts on this before we move on?
Well, I tend to draw the distinction between specialist skills and other skills. And I thought the word enterprise skills also, I think, is probably a better fit, transferable enterprise and non-specialist skills. And then there's just life's experience and a diversity of experience. And that's one of the things that I wanted to talk about a bit is the value of diverse experience beyond specialization, which starts right from the day that you're born, including, teams and creative pursuits and team sports. And one of the things that was measured when I entered the diplomatic service in the 80s was the fact that I ran my own radio program in a community radio station was a demonstration of the fact that I had, on my own organised a program. I'd taken responsibility, I'd taken risks. I was a self-starter, and so that was taken. That was something that was measured as a useful attribute to have as a diplomat. Interestingly, we have changed over time. There was a time where a high score in law and in other pursuits was considered far more important than social skills. So the balance went a bit out of whack, and I think now in recent years it's been reestablished as something that's really important to have, apart from high marks, high scores in the areas of specialization, that you can actually talk to people and speak and also empathize with them and be culturally sensitive and all the things that is required to build relationships that are successful and that benefit the business.
All right. Well, I look forward to you producing your certificates for life experience shortly, Martine. They're quite interesting. All right. Thank you very much. And thank you, Colette. So Derek, if you could talk to us a little bit, and we'll do the same thing. We'll have a chat about your contribution, Derek.
Thank you. And Martina, that diverse range of experiences, I think, is such an important one. It's what we're always trying to provide in school education. How much can we push our students out to experience different things? But also, it's one of the things I'm always looking for teachers who haven't gone straight from school to university and then back to school to teach. I wish, and I think part of what we need to be doing in education is trying to encourage more people who've got a breadth of experiences to come in at a more mature age to join the profession, because I think it's very limiting that sort of the natural progression that people have through that way with teachers. And in Australia, our system, there are some things we do very well in the school education system, and most of those things involve the standardized aspects of education. Despite slipping in recent years on literacy and numeracy, or this century from sort of being 5th or 6th in the world in the OECD on the PISA study, the Program for International Student Assessment, to being about 12th to 15th. That's still a pretty strong performance, and it's a pretty strong performance on 15-year-olds for literacy and numeracy in a very standardized way. What it means is, I think, that as a school system in Australia, we're pretty good at teaching to the middle. And what we lack, and this would again be shown by the OECD studies, is that we've got some big issues on equity, but with our lower 5% of students, and I think we've got some real issues on excellence, and that we don't really, through our standardized system, push our students enough at the top overall across the country. And that, I think, comes through as we narrow what we do in schools in many ways to end up, and Peter referred to it earlier, with our ATAR, Australian Tertiary Admissions ranking, with the key word, which is ranking, which is what students all end up with, a ranking when they graduate from year 12. And that ranking comes from their individual subjects, 5 or 6 subjects in most of the jurisdictions we've got for education in Australia, 5 or 6 subjects that are very silo based, and I guess fit into that notion of learning a set of skills rather than a broader set of interdisciplinary characteristics that might fit under that soft skills or that transferable skills banner. So the question, it is a cheap and efficient system, of course, for sorting students for university, but it's not necessarily the most effective systems for preparing students for life. Although there's a lot to like about the set of skills of having to, to sit a test and know at a certain point of time you've got to have some knowledge and to be able to communicate that knowledge, in written form and indeed in other forms with languages and other things. So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater with that, but what I do want is to reduce the overall importance of what comes out at the end of that, which is the ATAR and the academic transcript. So it means, what can we put alongside that? And if we were able to reduce that so that those silo-based subjects became maybe 3 or 4 instead of 5 or 6 and fit in other things with it, and we fit other things in our middle schooling, those are, I think, and what we're working on really hard as a school is the short courses and micro-credential short courses that have credibility in their micro-credentialing and their badging. And the ultimate goal, or even it's really a short-term goal, we want to do this in the next 6 to 12 months, is to have 150 micro-credentialed short courses, around 2/3 of which would be delivered in the virtual space, because then students can be doing them at their own time, at their own pace, and when they want, which students can also pick up at any point in time. They're not age based as well. So an exceptional student who might be 12 years old but in a particular area has a great passion and interest and can operate in that area at the level of a 17-year-old or 18-year-old, year 11 or 12 student at school, can be following through that passion, have those badging staged in different levels and work through it that way. I also think if we get it right, and particularly we get those micro-credentialed courses in the virtual space right, it can help with the equity issue overall, because I think we can then deliver that across a broad range of schools around the country, including into remote regions where Australia has particular issues around equity. And so I think there's a really interesting place to play in with that. But it then brings across also to the notion of what are the broader set of transferable skills that we want our students to have when they leave schools. And I think a broad cultural competency is a part of that. Obviously, the communication skills which need to be developed now in multiple forms. And one of those communication skills is obviously communicating in the forum we are today, in the virtual space and via Zoom and other platforms. And so, we're pushing really hard through year 10, 11, 12, the last 3 years of school to make sure that, I want all of our students to have at least one of their courses delivered in this form. Some of it will be face-to-face, some of it will be in this form, because that's a skill they have to have as they head out there into the workforce. And then adaptability, creativity, the whole teamwork notion. And again, teamwork is now not just people, of course, working face-to-face with each other, but it's as we're working here as a team to try and deliver something of value to a broader set of people. Critical thinking, analytical, and creativity. Those are the sort of things we're looking to develop more. And I wanted to focus for a moment on one of those words, adaptability, because just this morning I got some research back from, and I'd contributed to it, which was it was largely Melbourne based, but it was around 700 CEOs and leaders of businesses who'd been asked what were the set of skills that they were most looking for now in new employees. And number one of those, and we are coming off 112 days of lockdown, so perhaps it's not surprising, but number one of those was adaptability. And so, at the moment, there's a broad recognition we're all going to have to learn to work and are learning to work in different and quicker ways, and adaptability is a key for that. And it really got me thinking around what is the notion of adaptability? How can we measure it? Because I think I agree with Colette in the sense it's almost like if we don't measure and assess something, it's not valued, of course. So and then how might we put that into a framework that can get a broader recognition for a potential employer, can be taken into account by a university of that this person has that skill. And that might be through another thing we're working on, the notion of developing a bit further the learner profile around these transferable skills, which a student can start with, you know, 7 or 8 characteristics that we want at year 7 and build it out as they go through the school, and the mastery components, they get right to the outer circle through that. And adaptability would be, you know, I think a key element of that. And also, I think, with a recognition, if we can find a way of recognizing these skills, something like adaptability is not necessarily something that your very comfortable middle-class student who's gone to a great school is going to have. That's going to be a recognition that someone's had a bit of a few challenges along the way and done things a bit tougher, and might have had to work their way through. And we want that recognition because they've shown, you know, that they can achieve through that and can be adaptable and flexible. So again, I think it feeds back into an equity issue in education if we can recognize a broader set of characteristics. And that may be, as I said, through, you know, developing some clear, more coherent learner profiles and mastery transcripts. So you end up with, at the end of your schooling, you know, your academic transcript and your broader notion of a mastery transcript that applies to the transferable skills. So I think that's perhaps a way for us to look back going forward.
That's interesting. Thank you, Dick. I mean, listening to that discussion, I mean, that's a very different way of talking about it than we would have done even 3-4 years ago, maybe. You know, this is happening incredibly fast. Not only the technology behind this that, you know, Serge and his colleagues, you know, and the companies that surround them through the kind of open badge process and the open admission process and the technology that sits behind it, but also the kind of nature of the conversation seems to be extremely different than it was before. So we've always talked about, as you quite rightly pushed back earlier, saying it's not soft skills, it's a different kind of formulation. But actually the nature of this discussion is changing very rapidly. And I guess you're right, part of it may well be that, as you highlighted in the research, the stuff that came back from the CEOs around, you know, our changed circumstances now. But also it might indicate some broader things about, which I guess is what I hinted at in the opening, the kind of reevaluation of the value of these skills. They're not nice to haves anymore, right? They're essential things that, you know, we see economic value in. So I think in our discussions earlier, you know, before this event, we talked about some examples of how, you know, recognition is an economy. And of course, one of them is that you display things on your LinkedIn profile. You do that for a particular reason. You manage your presence, and, you know, it gives you economic value or reputation or status, or, you know, perhaps even, you know, a piece of the business that arrive your way. And that's a very different way of looking at things. So at one level, you know, that kind of model is now seeping its way slowly into what were, you know, quite traditional ways of, you know, of viewing the notion of recognition. I think that's really interesting. Martine or Colette, do you have any comments on Derek before we move on?
Oh, it's just this around economic value. I mean, it's also societal value. And so I think, you know, some of those shifts that I was talking to around, you know, our millennials and Gen Z in terms of the expectation, so their desire and appetite, I guess, to make a broader contribution, but also the expectation that they have of their employers or their future employers or the companies from which they, or organisations from which they buy goods and services, that those organisations are actually upholding broader, you know, the values that they also hold to be true. So I think the skill, you know, the skills that are the recognition of the skills and the contribution that you're actually making, yes, to the economy, but also the societal value and impact that delivers is increasingly important. And I think that businesses are also turning their mind to, well, they have been for a long time in terms of, you know, corporate social responsibility and how you capture that, but how do you actually also enable your employees or staff who are wanting to make those valuable contributions and wanting to also have recognition for them? How do you actually support them in doing that?
Martine, do you have any comments on that? I've got one more thing to say if you
comment about that. This is, we are now ascribing value to a broader range of things than we used to. I see a bunch of guitars behind you there, Peter. And I recall my childhood, I spent in a German school, and for example, music was just part of the basic curriculum, and it was deemed to be important for your development to help you with your thinking as well as your other specialist skills. It was not a bolt-on like it has been treated for a long period of time in the Australian education system. That's a great example of where diversity, you're doing these for their own sake, but also because they actually help you be a better thinker, a more empathetic person. Somebody that plays in an orchestra is naturally going to have much more of a team view of an approach to the way you achieve an outcome. So I think we've changed over time between valuing specialisation over a more diverse portfolio of experiences that make you a more useful person in the workplace. And I think we're back at that now. Which is not in any way to undermine the importance of some basic skills that you need to learn in school to actually able you to specialise and make you a useful person in the workplace in a certain area. So I think a diversity of experience and skills, be it in music or in sport, or that's something that was valued much more as part of the basic curriculum. And then we went for a period where we said, no, people just have to focus on what they want to specialise in. And the pendulum now seems to have swung back the other way.
Yeah, no, indeed. And I think the other aspect is that, it sounds like to me, sorry, Martine.
Civic engagement, which is also volunteering, which is something that I wanted to quickly talk about later on, is about the importance, not only importance of volunteering, but to your point, Colette, that organisations that give their staff volunteering time, they don't recognise them as billable hours. They should be, because they're actually building your staff's capacity and ability and professional development, as well as making a contribution.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, the other thing that occurs to me listening to this is that, it seems to me that the kind of badge-based recognition in the open badge, open recognition thing, the way that our colleagues are talking about it, turns out to be much more important than you think. I guess we've been pushing back against the notion that, we've always, in the Haileybury projects in micro-credentialing, we're trying to push back against the idea that they're just a bunch of badges that you get. Actually, they're much more important than that. And in fact, the architecture that is being built here around open badges, the technology side of it, is actually going to be one of the key things for people going forward, because it recognizes and warrants exactly those things, such as civic engagement and investment in a community in ways that aren't traditionally measurable. And I guess that's again, back to the top of the conversation before we move on to you, Martine. I guess the kind of thing is, if that's an economy, how quickly does this change? What's the value of these skills? How do you measure that? Is it like a traditional economy? Are there ways of sort of trading those things? What's the value attached to it? I think that's a really intriguing notion that, we're starting to change the way that we look at this. So, and as Derek said, this is you see things as a portfolio of things and is recognized as such rather than just a transcript. All right, I'm going to stop talking. All right, thank you. Thank you. Martine, would you like to talk to us, please?
So I just been thinking about this. I was reflecting, first of all, on the work that the Committee for Melbourne has been doing in the last few years. Well, in fact, the very basis of what the Committee for Melbourne does and what it aspires to do, it is a cross-sectoral group of professional businesses in financial services. We've got universities, we have the arts and culture sector, the not-for-profit sector represented, the community sector. And the magic or the value of what we think we can contribute is precisely the cross-sectoral perspective we bring to anything that happens in the economy and in Melbourne's economy and its livability. And so in some ways, having been established in the 80s, if you look now at how do you problem solve some of the more complex problems that our communities and our economies face, that cross-sectoral collaboration is front and center of the way people think about how they're going to resolve a problem. And so when we looked at, for example, what the big challenge was in 2016 that was facing us, where was the next burning platform? It was the coming of the fourth industrial revolution. It was a transformation of our economy through the fourth industrial revolution. And what were some of the strategic needs that we needed to be right on top of in order to be able to prosper and thrive in this rapidly changing environment. And future skills was one of those key strategic needs that we identified that came out of that exercise. And we used scenario planning and we looked at, what was the world going to look like and how do we prepare for it? And future skills, enterprise skills, soft skills was one of the top items on the list. Because if you look at what a 15-year-old can expect to be doing now, what do they say? 17 different jobs in 5 different areas before you reach retirement. So, it stands to reason that adaptability and transferable skills and lifelong learning as you adapt to the new challenges that come on is absolutely front and center of what you want, not only as an employee, but what you're trying to foster as an employer in order to get the greatest value out of the people who are working with you. So big tick on the kind of stuff that Colette's been talking about. That's absolutely across the board. And also very much being informed by different perspectives from different sectors of our community, medical, research, digital capability, financial services. You need to deploy all the forces that you've got to come to the right kinds of solutions to make sure that you can survive and you can thrive. But I also wanted to go back a bit and look at some of the things that we don't want to lose sight of, that we don't want to lose in understanding how we kind of recognize and add value to our lives and to our community and to our work. And I do think that we don't want to drop the humanities or the liberal arts altogether. They're so important because we can learn from history. They teach us to think critically, to ask questions, especially when our economic and social well-being is tied to our ability to constantly interrogate and innovate. And I think that in Australia, this kind of price point that the government has now established, where it's actually probably largely for ideological reasons, raised the price of the cost of a liberal arts degree and lowering STEM because we want more people in STEM, it's kind of a counterintuitive thing to be doing. First of all, because actually universities will probably want to have more of those degrees because they fetch a higher price. But secondly, you're actually then creating, this is an elite enterprise. It'll only, once again, be reserved for the elites who do humanities degrees, when the kind of skills that humanities teaches you want to be able to spread right across your workforce. So I think there's a policy challenge here that we really need to rethink the value, rather than the fact that there just seem to be kind of hotbeds of lefty thinking universities. And in fact, we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater by setting a price point, which turns it into another elite pursuit. I've also spoken about the value of diverse experience beyond specialisation. The embedding creativity in everything that we do. One of the things that we've looked at is the value of creativity in business. With the rise of the fourth industrial revolution, again, innovation is tied to creativity. We ran a workshop recently about the value even of having a creativity commission that looks at embedding the role of creativity to build value, not only through the P&L, through dividends and working capital. It matters socially. There are some interesting examples. The UK has created an innovation foundation in 1998 called National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts, which is an endowment from the UK National Lottery, which recognises that creativity is a significant driver of innovation and the economy. And the Australian Bureau of Statistics estimates that the creative sector contributes an astonishing 86.7 billion to our GDP every year. So embedding creativity in the way we do business and through our entire enterprises is something to think about. Employers, come into the classroom. Provide a little bit more experiential learning opportunities. Some organisations are already doing that. For example, PwC in Sydney has moved one of its main offices right next to the University of Western Sydney, so they can actually start working together collaboratively with graduates, with undergraduates. They can do talent spotting. They can provide experiential learning opportunities before the individual has actually finished their degrees. They're also now saying that they're not necessarily going to just recruit people who have a higher degree. So that's a really interesting new approach from an employer's perspective, about looking more broadly about how they can build capacity, not just by the usual ticking of boxes. So recognition is provided by providing experiential learning and also taking people on board and recruiting them and being prepared to train them on site. I think I've also talked about making volunteering billable hours. This is not just about providing assistance to the not-for-profit sector or the non-commercial sector. It's also about learning. There are skills that the NFP sector has that are also of high value to commercial businesses, whether it be learning how to deal with a difficult person or a difficult customer. There are some really interesting examples where banks have collaborated with charitable sectors in order to get individuals who weren't paying their debts to pay their debts back through their use of their persuasive skills. So there is a transfer of skills that goes both ways. So NFP sector as well as the business sector need to work more collaboratively together, and you really do need to make volunteering billable hours. NFP does not need somebody to work in a soup kitchen to fill somebody's volunteering hours for two days a year. That's not what the not-for-profit sector needs, nor is actually going to add to the value of the experience of the worker in providing those volunteering perspectives. And also, I think empathy and perspective. I'm stealing from Simon Sinek here, but really understanding that leadership and recognizing that empathy and perspective are great assets and need to be somehow valued when we look at what makes a great leader and what makes a really effective worker. So learning how to value that by training people to listen and to be more empathetic in the workplace, rather than constantly feeling that they have to be the first or be running ahead of the game, but hang back and listen to others and be a bit more empathetic. I think that's another skill that somehow we need to find and recognize and value and ascribe some value to. So that's just a couple of thoughts, but certainly understanding that value comes from all sources, not just from one source.
Good, thank you, Martine. Derek or Colette, I don't want to talk to you. Is there anything you'd like to talk about in that, things that Martine's talked about?
I just might pick up on this, just Martine's comments in particular around, businesses or employers coming into the classroom, and just this, some of the work that we've done in the Australian market showed that it's a third of Australian workers expect employers and education providers, if they're undertaking a course, like they want the collaboration on the content. So they want their employers and their education providers, collaborating on the content so that what they get is got the academic rigor, if you like, but also the relevance to industry. I think it's around about a quarter of Australian workers, that are undertaking formal learning also want industry placements. And then, of course, you've got, some that want their learning fully integrated into their workplace. So I think it's just that combined with the earlier point that I was talking about in terms of the certification and the certification is, the skill development's important, but so is the certification as a signal. I think is a really sort of a big hint, if you like, to, and there are innovative models, around this where employers and education providers are working really closely together, like hand in glove, to understand the learning needs of their workforce, but also pull them through all the way from short courses through to, for example, higher apprenticeship programs where you actually get a full qualification.
Yeah, good, exactly. I mean, I think the kind of pullback issue is about, you need data on this. I mean, at one level, this, and we've all talked about it, these things are happening. People do things for their communities and they undertake creative activities, but it's often unsurfaced. And I guess one of the contributions of the whole badging infrastructure and badges and open recognition, open badges, is to try and bring that out so it can be measured and therefore valued. And I guess that's one of the key challenges is, at one level, we've always known that this was a good idea, doing these things. This is nothing new at one level, but it's now, I think we possibly have the opportunity to try and bring that to the surface and assign it some way of it, as Derek said, assign it a way of becoming visible for us in a way that, maybe it wasn't possible in the past. And of course, the other issue, which I think Derek and I talked about in a previous conversation, was the other infrastructure that sits behind this is the notion of security. And how could you verify that things are what they are? And of course, everybody's talking about this and some folks are doing it, seriously, is the whole verified blockchain infrastructure stuff, which we can, talk about endlessly. But there's certainly something in there about the idea that in an environment in which more and more people are doing these things, and which more and more these things are measured and then recognized, there's a need to make sure that they're the right things and are verified, and to make sure that they're okay. When Derek and I talked about in terms of, checking qualifications on what they are, which is a problem that, lots of people have faced in the past. So I think there's an interesting coming together of a set of ideas which actually have been around for quite a long time, and now, technologies in which that they can be recognized and surfaced. So I mean, I guess the other thing is what does the creativity recognition look like? And who does it? They're some of the key questions are, you know, who's going to do that? Is it a combination of businesses and universities? Is it, you know, civic organizations and government plus education providers? You know, who's going to do that? One proposal in the micro-credential discussion, which is slightly different to this, is that micro-credentials become part of the formal qualification systems of countries like Australia. I have my concerns about that because it may well be that that wouldn't lead to the best chances of success. So you need an independent way to recognize these things so that they're verified, to give people confidence that they are what they are, and to keep them up to date too. And I think there's a whole set of issues as the kind of badging movement, you know, kind of the heat's turned up on the badging movement, partly because of technology that allows you to do it. So we in Haileybury, as Derek will know, have built a badging taxonomy and a badge design system and a language that allows us to do this, which we think is actually pretty good. But we know that you have to constantly evolve these things to make sure that, you know, they do truly reflect what you want them to reflect. And therefore people later on in the economy where value is transmitted, like employers, really can be confident that they are what they are. All right, I think we're getting close to 10 minutes before we're finishing. Catherine, you said you might have a couple of questions that you might want to pursue. Do you want to talk about that for a minute before we wrap up?
I hate it when an academic says, but I have a comment instead of a question, but I'm going to do it. As somebody who's been in this space a very long time, I find it very exciting and refreshing that the language that we used way back in Mozilla Learning many years ago has resurfaced, but now actually got gravitas in a wider community. So things about value and trust and recognition, you know, are the things that we would attempting to build that open badge infrastructure around, or that OBI, which is now, you know, a part of the language of the currency of micro credentials. But, you know, that early work is what you have now just talked about, which is now, you know, maybe nearly 10 years old. But, you know, it's really exciting that it's now actual language that's accessible, and, you know, rather than being a disruptive technology, actually become something that's going to do the work that we had were really keen to see happen, to change a credentialing system and actually think about how people recognize who they're recognized by and what those recognizing systems are. So yes, let's design a creativity open badge. I've been trying to design one for years. No one wants in on it. It's time
sounds
to
like
actually.
Martine and Colette are right there with you. So
yes.
that's right.
Russell Howcroft's keen.
Good. Well, you know, how do you recognize agility and someone who's nimble and you know, who can think about possibilities? That process is what open badges are designed to do, rather than think about what a wider product looks like across things. And you were talking this earlier. I put cross-cutting in because cross-cutting actually came out of Mozilla Learning. Deb Everhart, who's now I can't remember what credential organization she's now with, but that was an important piece of work that actually came out of early open badge work, that this wasn't soft skills. These were cross-cutting skills that sliced things in half. And that's where we needed to do that credential work around. So thank you for a wonderful session.
Good. Well, I hope you enjoyed it. We could have talked about all kinds of things there, I think, for much longer.